So good afternoon, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and start? We have a lot of information to cover this morning, and I want to, on behalf of DLZ, but of everyone involved in this, we want to welcome you to this webinar on considerations for planning and the design of a modern fire station. So you've told us a little bit about yourselves and what your roles are, and I guess I would like to move forward and just introduce ourselves. So I'm Stephen Krumkowski. I'm the principal architect at DLZ, and so is that coming up? Yes, no, we're going to advance here in a moment. There we go. So I'm Stephen Krumkowski. I'm the principal architect here at DLZ. I've been with DLZ for about a little over 25 years, going on my 26th year. Have been working on fire stations and the design of public safety facilities for almost 35 years now. Registered throughout the Midwest and had the good fortune of working with not only career but volunteer and also some combined departments as well. So with me I have also Mr. Ashley Riley, who's a registered architect throughout the Midwest as well, and within the state of Indiana as an interior designer. And so she'll be sharing some of our thoughts regarding materials and finishes specific to fire stations. And then also Zach Alderman is our mechanical engineer, one of our mechanical engineer, who has designed quite a few fire stations and fully understands the nuances to a fire station to other public facilities, especially when it comes to HVAC and mechanical systems. So if you're interested a little more about DLZ, this isn't a DLZ sales pitch, so you can look us up on web and you can see some of the other roles, but we are located throughout the Midwest and have been involved in numerous fire and public safety facilities. So why don't we go ahead? So just as an overview in terms of what we're going to be talking about a little bit, we got the history, we got the project process, station design components, building systems, and its integration. At the end, we'll sort of do a quick recap, and then we'll have a chance for some questions and answers. And I think we have a poll.
Yes.
A real quick poll here. Is that coming up? Mm-hmm. Okay. So as that poll, we're going to go ahead and fill that poll out. We're just going to keep the presentation moving forward. Oh, I have to wait for the poll to close, I think, before I can advance. All right. So are they coming in?
Questions in the...
Oh, yeah. So if you do have questions that as we present information, feel free to put those down in the questions and answers section within this webinar. We'll answer those at the end. If for some reason we can't answer it or we need to get more information back to you, we'll be happy to contact you. We do have your contact information. We won't bombard you with emails, but we will respect your question and provide some additional information if it requires a little more of a lengthy discussion regarding that. So, all right. So,
yeah. So, Stephen, we've got about 90% of the folks have responded, and okay. I'm going to stop the poll results right now. The leading answer is all of the above. I want to hear about everything, and that is followed by project process, station site programming, and site considerations, and then carcinogen mitigation after that.
Okay. Well, great. Well, we have pretty much everything that you're interested in. So let's go ahead and just kind of start up here. And is that poll closed?
Yep.
There we go. So don't want to dwell on the history. Most of you understand the history of firefighting really throughout the world. It actually started in Egyptian time, and it sort of evolved over the years, right? And in the first fire facility or fire department really was started in the United States. It really had its roots in the insurance business. And Ben Franklin, interestingly enough, really established the first Union Fire company in Philadelphia. And for those that are interested, you can still see these markers when you're in Philadelphia or in Annapolis or any of the other more historical towns on the East Coast there. But it's really evolved, okay? And so I think what's important is that after 9/11, as tragic as that was, it really heightened the awareness to public safety facilities. And that it wasn't until about 10 years later that Harvard did their first study on carcinogenics and cancer and the impact to firefighters. And so in the last decade or so, there's really been a heightened awareness regarding firefighter fitness and wellness of your firefighters. And so it's really been a paradigm shift over the years. So you still have to, of course, you have to house your vehicles and your apparatus vehicles to fight fires, but firehouses and fire stations are so much more than that. You do so much more than purely put out fires as firefighters. And so this is really your home away from home. It's been a renewed sense of a community use and community participation within stations, whether it's through a training room that turns into a multi-purpose flexible community space. The other aspect is fire stations are really a stabilizing force for areas. Perhaps there's a zone of economic development that a fire station is really a public recognition of stability. You're going to be there for 40 to 50 years. There's a public commitment by the city to provide the proper service for that community and really fosters additional economic growth. So the other shift has been towards the firefighter health and safety. Cancer has caused over 66% of the career firefighters' line of duty deaths from 2002 to 2019. So there are statistics that continue to be out there regarding the impact of carcinogenics on firefighters. Fortunately, the PPE has improved significantly, but also the way we design fire stations responds to that as well. The other aspect is the wellness, and this was always, when this study came out, I was sort of shocked. There's actually more deaths by suicide than deaths on the line for firefighters, and that's something that we need to be aware of, and we need to be able to somehow respond to that. And how do we respond to that as architects when we design it, if we can help that situation? So what makes a successful project and your project goals? So most projects, either 15, 20, 30 years ago when I started, really have the same goals. You want to enhance public safety. You want to improve the level of service to the community. And you also want to improve your operational efficiency. We'll talk a little bit later why that's so important. But there's always other things that make a successful project. Perhaps there's a green initiative and you want to have a sustainable design and energy efficient facility. This is a public facility, so you are really setting the example for the overall community. You also, perhaps it's located within an urban setting or it's within a context of a neighborhood, and you want to be able to respond to that. I think it's important as designers, as I reinforce it to myself, as to all of our designers, is that this is a project that is for the fire department. You're just a means to have the fire department create a new facility or the city create a new facility. This isn't a showcase to reflect you personally. This is you're trying to solve a problem. And so it doesn't mean that it has to be ugly. It doesn't mean it has to be minimal. But it does mean that you have to serve some of the primary function of what this facility is going to be. And then you always have to be financially responsible. I don't think in the 35 years I've been doing this is that I've ever had a project that didn't have a budget that we didn't need to meet. And so we need to not only look at the initial cost and the budget, but we also have to look at the long-term cost and the operational cost and the maintenance to keep the facility in line. And then there's always a schedule commitment as well. So how do we do this? Okay, those are great things that everyone can say from a very general level, but how do we approach this? And I think what's been successful for us is really you have to develop a communication plan. Okay, it's quite simple. And all of these seem very straightforward, but it's amazing when the communication plan isn't established of how things can go sideways on it. So what does that communication plan do? It builds consensus. It defines a common vision. It's a dialogue of information. So we as architects and engineers, we have our experience of other stations, other departments, the technical expertise to put a set of documents together to help you along with that. But most importantly, it's you have the information of how, as a fire department, how you function and operate. So you know, you live and breathe and operate out of these facilities every day, okay? So many of the individuals as we go through and we tour facilities and so forth, that's one time that we have within your facility. You live that every day. And so it's important that you share that information. It's a dialogue of information, right? Dio is two. We got two people. It's ourselves and the fire department and the owner's team. It's sharing of that information. What happens at the end? You really develop a more successful project. You develop a partnership throughout the project, not just at the beginning, but throughout the entire project, and the life of the building itself is reflected in that. Want to go ahead? Okay, so do we move forward? Okay, there we go. So the collaboration. So how do we do this? How do we build this partnership with that communication plan? First, it's collaboration, okay? And the collaboration is multiple people involved. It's the design team. We have architects, mechanical, electrical, structural, site, civil, landscape architects, everybody under the roof, construction inspectors, surveyors, geotech, everyone under the roof that does anything associated with the design, okay? But that's just one piece of it, okay? We also have the owner's team. The owner's team is with the city administrators, the building committee, the firefighter personnel. And then also you can't forget about the community. The community is either somehow their taxes may be impacted by it. More importantly, the level of service is impacted by this new facility or this renovated facility. And so all of us have to work together as we move forward with this project. So it's about collaboration. Go ahead, next. Is it stuck? There we go. Okay, so how do we do this? Okay, so there's a couple of things that we engage the stakeholders in. Sometimes there's a questionnaire. That's a very passive way of gathering information, but it's also very effective. Okay, it's having all of your fire staff fill out questionnaires. Anyone that will be impacted. Sometimes we'll put a questionnaire, we'll put a questionnaire on a website and they can, and the public can respond to it as well. So it's gathering all that information. It also really allows a time, not in a controlled and a pressurized meeting that you feel like you have to have answers or someone doesn't want to speak up. It gives the chance for the firefighters or anyone else really to think about what their space is and how they want to respond to it. Okay, and then that really allows, we do this in advance, and then we have to have face-to-face meetings. Okay, so we talk about those answers. We talk about those spaces. We get to understand and know you on a much deeper level than purely a passive questionnaire. Okay, and many times we do this over a meal. Okay, so I'm obviously with a name like Krumkowski, I'm Polish, so my busha, for those who are Polish, know that that means grandmother. So my grandma, my busha would always say, well, you have to eat, so sit down and have a meal with us. So, you know, the fact is, the best time to do it is over a meal sometimes. And so there's times we've gone to a fire station at night and we've met with each of the shift. So we might have 3 different meals, but we still meet with everyone. Okay, so it breaks down the guards. It's a little more relaxed. It's a little more comfortable. You can talk about things very openly and really work through some of the details. And those are invaluable for us as a design team. You also have to do tours. Okay, so to do that, we can talk about lockers and vented lockers and double gears and where you're going to store various things, trench drains in the middle of the apparatus bay, your furniture that has power and it has fully, it can have flip tables and be nesting. Well, those are a lot of different terms. If you're not familiar with that, the best way to resolve that and come on to the same understanding is visiting not only your existing station, so that we can understand what are the problems. You're saying that there's a lot of problems with you don't have storage. Well, what does that really mean? Does that mean you need a 500 square foot space, or do you need just a room so that you can hang your jacket in? Okay, so we also go through not only your existing stations, we also go through other stations. And these other stations, many times they're stations that we've designed, but also we go through stations that other firms have designed. It's not a matter about, we don't always have, what we've done on one station doesn't necessarily will apply to your station. And so you might find something in one of the publications, the Firehouse magazine, most of you probably receive, Architectural Record, there's trade magazines. All of those have different little components that might have something of interest to you. And so it's looking at those and understanding, is that applicable to you? And then there's always conferences. So we tend to be participants at the Fiero conference and the station design. We've been on the jury before. We presented at each one of those conferences. So those are, if you have the opportunity, those are also great resources, okay? It's about gathering the most information so that you can have the very best solution. Okay. We talked about the community and engaging that community. Well, how do you do that? You got to have public involvement. The old town hall meetings are great, okay? You got to do it early in the process. Okay, you got to, if you don't tell them and share information, they're going to make their own assumptions. Okay, so it's not just at one point, but it's really at key milestones. Keep them informed. It doesn't take a lot of effort, but the public will see that you're reaching out and you're being transparent to them. The other is specific websites. It allows you to control the information that's disseminated. If you wait for a bad tweet or a Facebook post, then to try to respond on it, now all of a sudden you're on the defense and you really need to be on the offense. You need to have a common message that you're sharing with everyone, being transparent with the information. That goes a long ways in terms of selling a project. Okay, so the project process. So most people, it sounds like, are interested, or many, right? So are interested in the project process as we go through. And so no matter what you call the project process, whether you just call it planning or you call it architectural language or what really is happening during there, the bottom line is it's a very linear process. The decisions you make in the beginning of the project will impact how you occupy and how you function the building. And don't be scared by that. The fact is that there's intermediate steps along the way. And so the planning and the design portion of it, that's really about 8 to 10 months. We're talking about a typical building, fire station that's maybe, 10, 12,000 square feet. We're not talking about a 60,000 square foot that may take a little bit longer, but a typical fire station, 3-4 bay station, 8 to 10 months. 10 to 12 months. And then you have procurement. Most of this, you have to follow public bidding laws. And so typically you have at least 3 to 4 weeks that for public advertisement, so forth. Then you have to usually meet a council meeting and get their approval. So all of that, usually 1 to 2 months for that. Sometimes it can be a little bit longer. And then you actually construct it. So we've constructed fire stations that are about 15,000 square feet in 8 months. It's a little aggressive, but they were able to do it. But typically 12, 15,000 square foot facility, you're going to be 12 to 18 months. Now, for us that are located in a northern climate, we have a thing called snow. And so snow isn't really great for construction. And so when you bid the project, and so you want the project to be continue throughout the construction period, you don't want to shut down, start a project for a month and then shut it down. So how that comes into play with your overall schedule needs to be considered early on. And then overall, your occupancy, as we talked about, your buildings are really supposed to last 40, 50 years. Okay. So let's talk really quickly about that process, what occurs. And I won't spend a lot of time, but I'm going to talk about it because I think it's important. The most important aspect, the one takeaway is the most important aspect is the pre-planning and the programming. Okay. So you have we call it the circle of influence. Okay. You have a lot of different things. These multiple aspects can impact your project, anywhere from weather conditions to your funding. It could be your land acquisition. You got it held up in that. It could be the PR issue of the perception. You have to do a little extra effort regarding that. The construction industry right now is what's impacting projects. There's a shortage of workers and there's also a shortage of some material, some of the raw material. So all of that is important for your due diligence as you move forward. And you really need to do that up front. And you don't wait and react to something that occurs. You have to know that and talk about that early on. One thing about budget I'll talk about real quickly. The budget, we always start with the project and we talk about budget. And so inevitably someone will say, oh yeah, we have $2 million. That's our construction cost. And then as we get into the project, we begin to realize that the $2 million is total project cost. So the one thing to keep in mind is that the construction cost and the total project cost are not the same thing. Okay, you have anywhere between 20, 25, 30% of what we call soft costs. There's other costs associated with the project. So for those administrators that are watching, Mr. Mayor, Mrs. Mayor may say, I have a $2 million fire station I'm going to build. Okay, that's what everyone hears, $2 million. Well, $2 million is really about 1.5 million in construction costs. So just, it's one of those things you have to talk up front, and then we can react and go forward with it from there. Okay. So as we get this pre-planning information together, then we move into traditional phases of architectural design. So we move in to a schematic design. We'll talk about programming in a minute, but really we translate the program into some sort of design concept. We look at the adjacencies. We might do 4, 5, 6 different iterations of the program. And I think that's one thing that I know Ashley and I enjoy doing, is that you can have the same program and we can come up with 6 different solutions each. So 12 different options, but we're looking at the same base information. And that's what makes design interesting. There's no one right way to do it. So that's why we need to have you included in that process. What makes the most sense on how you function, how you operate. Okay, and then we refine that total project cost. We refine the schedule. We move as architects. We love great names. So we develop the design. So this phase is called design development. All right, so in this phase, we bring in the engineers. We bring in Zach and Corey and other folks that are mechanical and electrical folks that are brought into the project. And so we might have a wonderful image of what the building looks like, but we have to make sure that it's going to be heated, cooled, we're going to have power, it's going to stand up, right? And so we have to bring in all of our engineers and we start to refine the building design itself. At the same time, there's another stopgap measure that you begin to refine the budget. You start looking at the construction sequencing. You start looking at the final design direction. You look at material selection. It might be brick, but what color brick are you talking about? Are you considering? So as we go through this, we move into the construction document. So all of the upfront work is really in the main decision needs are determined early on in the project. Then we move into the technical aspects. And those technical aspects are not only just the bidding requirements, but and the general conditions that are part of the overall project, but there's the drawings themselves. Now these drawings, there's not 1 or 2 sheets. There's probably about 50 drawing sheets that for a typical fire station project. Then you have technical specifications, and that not only tells the contractor what material, but how to install it and how to store it and how to procure it. All of that, all the building, we go through a quite extensive level in terms of coordination of the building systems and a constructability review. It may look great on paper, but the reality is it's going to cause problems during construction. Okay, and then bottom line is a quality set of documents we found equals competitive bids. If the documents aren't thorough enough, then the contractors are going to put safeguards in it, which basically means they're going to bump their number up to protect themselves. Okay. Then we move into bidding, and we won't get into the types of bidding methods there are. There's multiple ones out there, but for a typical design bid build, you would have a single general contractor. There's iterations of different design build, construction manager at risk. There's progressive, integrated design. There's all sorts of different methods that are out there right now. And so the bottom line is you're going to establish, and you're going during this period, this is the actual hard construction cost. Everything that the contractor, the drawings say the contractor is going to bid and build. Okay, we always build in safeguards. We like at least 10% of alternates that are built into the project. And these are things that maybe you want it, but maybe you don't know if you can afford it or not. So it gives you a chance to get a hard construction cost on a particular item. Maybe you need to eliminate one of the apparatus bays because you built it into the project, and maybe you can add it or eliminate it, either one, because it's for future equipment that you're going to need to plan for, and we plan for it in the documents, but we don't know if you can actually afford it. So these are things that are real important during that bid process. And then you go through the construction administration. This is the fun part. Okay, so you start building the project. And so with this is another little PR move. So you have a groundbreaking ceremony. You have a beam raising. The last beam of the structure goes up. You invite the public. You have a little ceremony. You have the public turn the dirt over. You end up having the public sign the beam. All of those things are small gestures, but then there's inclusion to your overall project, which builds support for it. And then you have occupancy. Whether you have a decoupling ceremony or a ribbon ceremony, the bottom line is you now can occupy the building. And this is something that you do for the next 40 to 50 years, okay? So that's the overall process. And why do we talk so much about the information up front and the communication plan and gathering the information? Well, in the traditional, I would say old school way of doing it, is that you would start very generally from a pre-planning and design development. It was a little more general. You really didn't get into the weeds of the technical aspect of it until the construction documents. And so what happens is, what this new shift is that we actually spend a lot more effort and a lot more time up front talking about those decisions. Okay, so the solid line and the dashed line, that represents the amount of change and the impact to cost. Okay, the cost of the design change. So if you can see at the end of the project, if you decide you want to build another office or you want to put a door somewhere else, well, the contractor is already under construction. They're already building it. That's going to be a change order for you. Okay, so it will have a direct impact. During the design phase, early on, if we decide we're going to move a wall around, it's really no cost from your standpoint. That's part of the overall process that we go through. So it's real important you talk, you have that collaboration, you discuss elements in quite a bit of depth early on in the project. Okay. So we talked a little bit about programming. I already alluded to it, programming and site analysis. Let's talk a little bit about programming itself. So it's really it's a fancy name for saying that we're going to identify all the spaces in your building, okay? And on average, why is that important? It's important because at this stage, square foot equals dollars, okay? Which equals then your total project, okay? So on average, fire stations, because of material costs and so forth, you're coming in at about $325 a square foot. Could it go up to, we try to keep it under 400. We have a couple projects that are over 400 because of what they wanted with niceties of finishes and so forth. But, 325 to 385 a square foot is a good general rule. So if you can cut out, 100 square feet out of the building without too much effort and you haven't designed anything yet, you can save a significant amount of money. We also have benchmarks to keep it in line in terms of 60% is usually how much you are allocated for the apparatus and the operations portion of that. What we've noticed lately is the wellness and fitness. That used to be about 3 or 4%. Now it's up to 7%. It continues to grow. We have some stations that's more than 10% because they have a specific need in terms of how they're doing their wellness and their fitness. Okay. So we take all that information, what we call is the quantitative information. We also actually will talk a little bit about the qualitative in terms of the finishes and the materials. But these represent all the parameters of the project. Okay, so one thing we always talk about is, okay, you need an office. Okay, so it's not just an office. How are you going to use that office? Are you going to have visitors in that office? So you can see those three images and diagrams in the middle of the screen there. So those are all offices. So if I said how many offices and I said one, I would say, okay, you're going to have the one on the right-hand side. Well, can you imagine a fire chief having one on the right-hand side? He doesn't have a conference table. He doesn't have a place for someone to sit. He may need some additional storage. All of those come into play. So a typical office for, say, a chief is anywhere between, I would say we start out at about 150 a square foot. Maybe another administrator is 120. An open cubicle is about 80 square feet. Okay, all of those have an impact to your project. Okay, and so we break it. We have general parameters. Okay, there's some general guidelines. That's also past history. So when you're breaking out each one of these spaces in terms of the sleeping quarters or your day room or your dining room, how many people are using that space at any one time directly impacts the size of the space. Okay, so your training room, if you want 30 people in that room, 30 times 35, that gets you your total square footage that we would start. And that's just the training room itself. It's not the support or the closets and the storage areas adjacent to it. That's its own separate room that's identified. So it's important that we break those down. And so we have those discussions. just in a very general loose notion, between 400 and 600 square feet per firefighter that we'd be using the facility equates to the overall size of the facility. The other aspect is your apparatus bay. Your apparatus bay takes the most space typically. And so it's about 800 square feet per apparatus bay. We use always 16 square feet wide by 50 feet long. But this also comes into play in terms of your individual equipment. Okay, so if you have an aerial equipment, you're going to have a longer than if you have some of your other vehicles. If you have AMBO units that are part of your station, those are about half that size. And so how do you arrange it? How do you exit? How do you respond? And that's really critical. So generally a 5-bay station is going to be about 4,000 square feet as a starting point. And then we work out the specific details based on the actual equipment that you're using in there. And then we take that programming information and when we start to work on the adjacencies, okay? So the adjacencies are basically the arrangement of big picture square footage. You can see administration, a controlled entrance, training. All of these are to scale. They represent the size and the scale of that individual area. So if you decide that your sleeping quarter really needs to be on the other side of the building for some reason, or you want your training closer to the administration, it's quite simple to move these boxes around. Okay, it doesn't impact your square footage. It's just part of the process. Okay, if you decide that you want the apparatus bay to be exiting in the other direction, it won't really impact things. So you begin to look at the station components in terms of the adjacencies and how does that, how do they relate to one another? In the same way, parallel to the building component, the site analysis also is taking place. Okay, because they have a whole set of parameters, not only how many parking spaces for visitors and for the firefighters, but they have elements that you need to look at: the zoning, the ordinances, the land use, geotechnical information, your environmental studies. Where are the utilities coming in? Is there a parcel? How large of a parcel do you truly have? And so when you don't know, and maybe you have multiple sites that you're looking at, we have developed on this one, it's basically a 14. I think it's grown a little bit since this site selection on this project. But on here we go through a rating system, and some of it's also weighted. So it might be more critical the fact that you can have the size of the parcel to fit your building and all the circulation. That might have a higher weight than the ease of utilities coming into the site. You don't know, or if it's next to a neighborhood. So anyway, you have some empirical data that you can actually make a determination. And then of course, there's always other factors that come into play. Someone wants to donate land, even though it's not the best. You can save money if they donate it. There's other factors that come in as well. Okay, so real quick, a little case study. Okay, and we won't name this individual project, and we sort of joke about it and we have a good laugh with the owner with it. Not at the time, but now we do. Okay, so they acquired this 4-acre parcel, a little bit under 4-acre parcel for $1. They said, we got a great deal. It's all farm field, but it's $1. This is great. And so we've already laid it out. We just need you to design as an architect. We need you to prepare the permit drawings. Can you do that for us? I'm like, well, okay, yeah, sure. Let's have a talk. Let's talk about it. So I went out there. You can see it was a big farm field, and things didn't look right to me. I started looking, and there was a big swale in one area of the site. There were some other areas that just didn't quite look at. We did a very quick research. We realized that there was no sanitary sewer, so now they're going to have to put a septic field in. We realized they had water, but we didn't really know how they were going to treat the stormwater. It seemed a little odd. There was this big depression in the land that they had, but they were ready to go forward. They were on to break ground immediately. Well, as we convinced them finally that they need to do their due diligence in a phase 1 and look at the properties and so forth, they discovered there was actually a utility easement, a drainage ditch. And it wasn't just a drainage ditch, it was a 150-foot easement that did not permit any building, It also was the drainage ditch for the entire watershed for this regional area. And so what happened is they had to go back and they had to buy 4 more acres of land. Now is a premium because they already committed to buying this first parcel. And so now they had to figure out where are we going to put the septic, where are we going to put the storm retention areas. And so it became much more complicated for them. And so they didn't do their due diligence. And so it's important that you do that up front. It doesn't take a lot of effort, but it does take effort so that you don't go down a path that you're going to have to regress in the development of the project. Okay. So site development overall is that we have a typical station layout and configuration. Probably the most important thing with your site layout is circulation. You need to make sure that you can get your vehicles, a pedestrian or a typical vehicle, a car, is a public vehicle is much different than apparatus rig. Okay, and so you need the proper turning radiuses, you need the ability to have a pass-through lane. You have to separate visitor parking from staff parking. And then there's things like utility space that needs to be accounted. There also is open space for your drainage and your on-site retention. And then there may be screening and other elements, so city ordinances and so forth. Training components, enough said about that. They take a lot of space, okay? Burn units, towers, all of those take space. Usually there's associated with this is you pull your rig up and so forth, and you need quite a bit of clearance, okay? So all of that comes into play with your site training, or site development, I'm sorry. So some of the 4 key components of any fire station, sort of move into the station components now. Health and safety of the firefighters, the living quarters, the apparatus, and the overall sense of community. And we'll go through these fairly quickly. So bottom line is hazardous zones. It's important to realize that a fire station, as we lay those out, this was that station we looked at earlier. You have to create a red zone, a warm zone, which is our yellow zone, and then your green zone. Okay, your green zone is your living quarters. That's your safe zone, okay? Your red zone is your hot zone. That's where your contaminations are, okay? And what you need to do is you need to establish those areas. Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. So, so your apparatus bay is really more of a yellow zone because you really should have already, through your procedures, you should have fairly cleaned that area. And so that's kind of your transitional and your warm zone. Your contamination zone, that's really where you go through and it's contaminated product. You're in PPE. You're also cleaning that before you move those into another space. And then your green zone, your cold zone, that's basically all of your living quarters. That's your safe spot, okay? So we'll go through this. We can go into this more detail if you have some questions, but the bottom line is you have to be aware of this as you're laying out the station and the adjacencies from the very beginning. A fire station is not a fire station. It's much more complicated than that, okay? So then our transitional, Zach will talk a little bit later about how HVAC systems are impacted by this. We need to know that up front, okay? And then our green zone, as I mentioned, this is really your safe zone for everyone, okay? So some of the more recent aspects of that comes into play in trends is just this, it's been around, decontamination has been around for a while, but a little more conscious effort in terms of the layout and the spaces that are provided. So if you see in that bottom left-hand corner, there's basically a gross decontamination hood. It's basically proper ventilation, ability to spray that equipment down quite easily. Okay, and that's a dedicated zone that you have your extractors, you have your service sink, all of those aspects. You have a deep sink, you have a shower component, all of those come into play. One thing just to note, don't put your personal laundry area within your decontamination zone. That's a no-no, okay? The residential, doing your linens and other things that are part of the firefighter living quarters, that really needs to be separated, not within this space. Okay, continuing that, the health and the welfare and the wellness of the overall. So we always call them wellness centers rather than fitness centers, just politically somehow that comes off as being less than a fitness club. A couple of things to keep in mind. One is multiple types of fitness, okay? Your cardiovascular, your free weights, your CrossFit training. We've seen a lot more of that. So the ability to open up your space, your training room to the outdoors and do CrossFit training is also important. Visibility. So before you used to always put the apparatus or the fitness equipment off the apparatus bay. You can't really do that now because of the zone configurations. You put it down in the basement, you kind of put it in the back 9 so that no one can see it because it was kind of loud and dirty and smelly and so forth. So the reality is they're becoming much more to the forefront. And why is that? It's not because you want to showcase you have a fitness room. It's for safety reasons. If someone goes down while they're working out, you want to be able to see them. Okay, if they can't get to the panic and duress button, you want to be able to see them. Okay, important that you add little things. So most of the drinking fountains now are becoming more hydration stations. Drinking fountains are more a thing of the past. So hydration stations still meets code. It's also bottle fillers and so forth are being used. Okay, acoustic treatment, ventilation, all critical. Small items like creating an expansion joint in this floor around the perimeter of the room. So when someone does drop a free weight, it doesn't reverberate throughout the station. Minor things, wouldn't think much of it until you understand how these areas work and function. Day room space, we move into the living quarters for the firefighters. Personal space impacts the wellness of the overall mental and physical impact of the firefighters themselves. Having quiet rooms or personal space that you can go in there with your family and not be disrupted by the rest of the firefighters. Lactation rooms are now becoming something that most cities are going to. And so having that ability that you have a dedicated room that can serve mothers on that. Study rooms, a lot more training and studying that has to go with firefighters than ever before. Having a quiet space that you can do that. So acoustics, lighting control, flexible furniture, multi-purpose spaces are real important with day rooms. Moves right into kitchens. Kitchens have to really look at not only your appliances, how are you going to function? Like to bring in natural light, but also it's sort of the gathering space. So you have to be aware of the overall acoustics of it. A couple of the amenities that always come that we've been putting more and more in stations are coffee bars, a coffee station, hydration station. Sinks need to be deep bowl, multi-bowled sinks with deep goosenecks to them. Our hood over our range or our stove needs to be a commercial graded hood. You can't put a residential recirculating fan that just, fire stations are considered a commercial operation. It doesn't matter the size of the stove. You really need to have the proper station. And then also islands that have additional storage space or an ability that you can pull up stool and gather around that space. So, okay. And then the dining quarters. So we've been finding the dining quarters also, current trend is really a sense of ownership, bringing in some natural light, of course, but also bringing in touches of it in terms of your overall of the table itself. Okay. If you notice, I failed to mention in terms of your pantries and your three shifts, each need an individual pantry as well with it, and how you treat that. And then, as we talked about, this open concept of the kitchen, the dining, and the day room. Really bringing that to the outside in, inside out. And so creating patio space that are covered, that another sense of space that can be used by the firefighters. We've also seen a lot more decks. You have to have a roof on your building, right? So if you can incorporate for multi-level facilities, if you can incorporate a roof area, very little additional cost, you can make that into a hard surface plaza and gathering space. And so that's been quite successful. It really becomes an extension, another flexible use for you. So a quick poll question here. Go ahead and respond. This is the sleep.
This is, yes, your sleep disorders.
So I think the question is, what is the percentage of individuals that have firefighters that have experienced some type of sleep disorder? And probably close that. No? Coming in. Okay. So as that goes through, I will say that the sleeping quarters are probably the most talked about outside the kitchen on any fire station. We spend an awful lot of time. We have an entire work session just on that. Okay, so what's our leader?
Results are in, and folks were paying attention when it was on a slide earlier.
Ah,
It is
shoot.
40%.
All right. Tried to catch you there. So, okay, we'll close that. Go to the next slide. Okay, so sleeping quarters, we spend a lot of time on sleep areas, okay? So really three basic types: open bunk, your semi-private, and then your private. And then there's iterations of each one of those. You always have to remember, you have issues of separation, male, female, gender neutral, something to consider. Differences in terms of responders. So firefighters versus EMS and how you respond to calls. Elements that come in, window treatment, your air quality. Zach will talk about that a little bit later. So all of these have an impact to you. And in the early stages, you got to talk about it because they all have various sizes that impact once again, it impacts the overall cost to your project, okay? But it needs to function properly. So in this facility, an average open bunk is about 60 square foot per firefighter per bed, okay? So this is one of the treatments that we eliminated and provided some minimal privacy for each of the firefighters in an open bunk concept. You can also go to a semi-private. This needs a little bit more space. On this particular station, they really didn't want open bunk and they couldn't afford to do individual sleeping quarters. And so they decide we're gonna group them based on their assignment. Okay, so engine company was in one room, EMS were in another room, and so forth. Okay, and then the commander always had his own, in that situation, had his own private room. So the private rooms, even in a regular station, we try to incorporate key elements into a private living quarters. Okay, so obviously the bed, right? But you also have dedicated wardrobe units for their clothing and for their personal items. And then we have a separate container or separate storage on this one on the image on the right here. That's for their bedding. And so, or for their other lockable items. Okay, so you need dedicated space for it. Small things like bringing in natural light are important. The counter space, so they can do their studying or their report writing, whatever they may have within it. All those little things come into play when we go through that. Now, there's also the transitional. These are more for volunteer, but we've also put them on career stations. They don't want to dedicate an entire room to a sleeping quarter for future or for visitors. And so on this one, we actually incorporated recessed wall beds into their day room. This allows on few occasions do they need someone sleeping overnight, but they also have, it's a little more comfortable than a cot that's stored in a closet that they can pull these down and have a decent night's sleep rather than sleeping on the dining room table or on their apparatus floor or wherever they end up being. So, okay. Along with sleeping quarters, we have a whole discussion about toilet rooms. Okay, so the communal toilet room that everyone in locker room space, you might have private rooms, but everyone uses the same restroom facilities. You can have a Jack and Jill configuration. It's real important that you have enough clearance. Okay, you need 2 doors that are opening, you have a shower, and then the toilet facilities as well. Or you have a private, but also the locker space is sort of a transitional zone between the sleeping area and the restroom, as well as the locker room itself. Okay, talked a little bit about the apparatus bay. It takes almost quite a bit of space within it. And so we started looking at that apparatus bay. It's fairly complex. We could probably spend 2 hours just talking about the apparatus space. So I'm gonna move through these. One of the elements that we need to talk about is the concrete apron, okay, and the approach. Okay, so you need lines of sight. Okay, it's bad enough, even if hopefully you get a signal preempter. If you don't have one, it's bad enough that even though your lights and your sirens are going, that the public doesn't stop sometimes. At least hopefully they'll slow down. So you need at least 50 feet minimum, and that's to the right of way. Okay, that's not to the street edge. And then also usually a general rule of thumb is your largest vehicle, and then we'll add another 20 feet to it. And that gives sometimes we like to double it, but sometimes the site just doesn't allow that to happen. Okay. So, sorry, we got another poll question. So I think this one is, how often have you had to replace or repair your overhead doors on a fire station? So Zach's laughing, so I think I know which one it is, but how many are in?
Too many to count is screaming to the lead.
Okay, so most of you, let's go ahead and let's close that down. And we'll share all these if you're interested in what the final results were. So, so really, it's too many to count. Okay, so it's probably one of the biggest expenses is replacing panels or replacing overhead doors because your driver was impatient or didn't wait for the door to go up. Okay, so what we've been finding of late is that go with the bifold doors. Okay, they do cost probably 4 or 5 times more than an overhead door, but you don't have the same problems. Okay, and so there's things that you need to look at also with an overhead door and a typical sectional door. We usually go with the high lift. That gives a little more clearance up above for inspection and fill ports and other things for your vehicles. Roughly that opening, we always say about 12 feet minimum by 14 feet high. It gives them a little more space. We talked a little bit as 16 feet for the base spacing, but this is the rough opening overall for the apparatus doors. See the bollard, always place bollards, no matter what you're using, whether it's overhead doors or bifold doors, always put bollards to protect those edges. It will save in the long run. Okay, some of the key components, clearances within your fire station. Okay, you got to have it wide enough. 16 feet will allow this. You got to have it wide enough that you can open up 2 vehicles at the same time and have the ability to pass through the 2 doors. You don't want to bottleneck. You're trying to respond to a call as quickly as possible. You don't want to be tripping over each other inside that apparatus bay, right? Small things in terms of clearance in front of your doors. Okay, so in terms of your bifold doors, remember they usually go in at least 4 feet into your space, and so you need another 4 feet. So your vehicles are going to be parking almost 8 feet before they get to the outside wall there. Okay. So we talked a little bit about service connections. Okay, so that space that's between the 2 doors, that's where you have your hoses, your compressors, you have your door operators, all that other equipment has a place to go. Okay, so usually when you're doing your hose reels, sometimes it's difficult to mount them on the wall. So if you do want a floor mount, make sure that pedestal is high enough that doesn't become a tripping hazard for you. So it's visible and you have the proper clearance with it. But remember, these stations inside, you have a lot of things going on. You have compressed air, you have water, you have power, you have your hose reels, you have your quick connects. All of those things come into play. Your vehicle exhaust, that's a whole nother discussion. Okay, you have to meet NFPA 1500. Zach will talk a little bit about that. We tend to put in direct capture, but there are other methods as well. You also always have to meet code minimum for the exhaust, and you have to have sensors. Your CO sensors and your NO sensors are critical regardless of the type of exhaust system that you have within your building. In terms of the training space, once again, let's utilize these spaces, be flexible, create that mezzanine space perhaps that you can turn into an internal training area. Adding a little more masonry walls, not going to cost very much. You can have your ladder work can be done inside. You can also have easily put in a structure and a manhole on that mezzanine, and now you can drop it down. Now you can do your confined space training. Okay, so mezzanines are notorious for having excess storage because it's a big open space. It gets filled up very quickly. So be aware of that. If you need dedicated space, tell your architect you need dedicated space. Okay, we go into that turnout locker gear. This is clean lockers. Okay, so there's a lot of different options. You can go the open rack system. We always recommend that they're wide enough you can have 2 sets of gear in it. We also like to have a boot storage shelf on it. It just keeps it separated from your gear. And then your helmet, of course, would have a separate upper storage area. Double lockers, if you're going with the locker type, we usually recommend that. Full height, also welded welded mesh for it for ventilation purposes as well. Okay. Second floor, you always have access. How are you going to treat with that? Ashley would talk a little bit about ADA requirements, but the bottom line is you also can add poles. Poles are coming back. They also cause a safety hazard just because of for those who don't know how to use them, twisting and spraining their ankle or breaking their leg. So be aware of that. You also, sometimes you need a separation between one level and the other from a fire standpoint. So how you treat that needs to be addressed. Also, slides are out there. The circular slides tend to make me dizzy when I go down them, but the single run, you need a lot of extra space though. But think about, you know, the wide stairs, the stairs that are going up. This is where firefighters are running down. Some are faster than others. You need to have those wide enough that you can get folks down quickly to the apparatus floor. Okay. Administration staff, just in terms of the overall watch office. The watch office is important. That's kind of the command center. Plenty of counter space, a lot of visibility, not only to the front apparatus space so you can see what's occurring, but also you want to have that to the public. Okay, so the public, we'll talk a little bit about safe places in a moment, but that really becomes the visible sign, the command center and the point of contact for people. Training rooms, seminar rooms, okay? Main thing to keep in mind is you need to have them large enough. They need to be flexible. Audio visual and lighting control is critical. Remember, one of the things that we talk about how to sell a project. So real quick story, there was a station we were doing and the council didn't want to they weren't in favor of it because the bottom line is that we drilled into it further. The council felt they wanted new council chambers. And so with that, we were able to talk with them and we were able to give the new council chambers and double that as their training center. So now all of a sudden the council was fully on board, no additional cost to the project, but now they had a place and everyone was happy in the end. So visual controls in terms of the number of monitors that you have, the size of the room comes into play. You also have to remain flexible. You know, you do your CPR training in these rooms. You also have, you know, your access control. You need dedicated storage rooms for your training space. Flexibility, we've seen in some stations going ahead and putting in movable partitions that are able to divide up two separate rooms into one larger room. That's kind of maximizing your space, okay? There's some facilities we've actually incorporated. This isn't one of our projects, but a project that had sliding partitions that could utilize the lobby space and utilize a much larger space for other events. We talked briefly about a safe place. So fire stations are considered a safe place that in your time of distress you can go. But also the new element, 29 states have adopted the safe haven, mainly Midwestern. So baby safe haven boxes are being put into stations, and this allows a facility to, a new mother to drop off her infant, her newborn, and also it's connected to the controls and sends an automatic signal to dispatch. So all of those things you got to plan for. You don't want to be cutting into a wall after the fact, okay? So, and then finally, storm shelters. Storm shelters, this is some states in terms of the code, the IBC, those that are on the 2015 and 2018 versions. We have multiple states here, so it depends on what your state is, that this is considered you need storm shelters. And so they have separate parameters in terms of structural, your plumbing systems, your HVAC, other elements for this. You can't really convert a non-storm shelter into a storm shelter easily. Okay, Indiana is an exception. Missouri is also an exception to that. They don't require that yet, but the codes are under review always. And so within the next couple of years, I would anticipate that. So I want to turn this over to Ashley, and Ashley's going to talk a little bit about material selection as well as some of the key components for your station. So Ashley.
So thank you, Stephen. I know we're running a little short on time, so I'm gonna try to whip through these kind of quickly. So while the function of your station is the most important aspect, proper material selection is key to ensure that your building provides you with the most efficient use of your space. The exterior envelope sets the tone for your building as a whole. It is important to remember that while durability and ease of maintenance are important, the materials and systems you select will not only have a cost impact, but also an energy efficiency impact. The exterior facade and massing of your facility needs to reinforce your overall project goals and the image that you want the station to portray. Whether that's a modern station or a historic looking station, it's important that your station reflects your community and your surrounding context. As with the exterior facade, your roofing material can significantly contribute to the image of your station. Selecting the correct roof system can not only impact your energy efficiency, but depending on whether or not you decide to select a flat roof or a sloped roof, it also impacts the overall structural system for the project. So moving to the interior, the materials selected need to reflect the function of the space. In the apparatus bay and support spaces, durability is the most important component that we have. But there are several routes that we can take to achieve this. Slip resistant and striping on the floors are small components that can contribute to the functionality of your apparatus bay. Using simple materials such as concrete block for your walls allows you to have a low maintenance space, but also allows you the flexibility to wash your vehicles inside if you have inclement weather. So conversely, for your living quarters, while it's important that your materials are durable, durability is not the most important component to the functionality of those spaces. For sleeping spaces in particular, acoustics and comfort are much more prevalent. Softer finishes such as carpeting and gypsum board walls are utilized, and additional features can be added such as blackout curtains and high noise reduction ceiling systems. And those can be implemented to help your firefighters get some solid sleep regardless of what time of day it is. So Stephen touched on kitchens a little bit earlier, and I'm going to continue that. So kitchens have a unique functionality within your station, and they require an ease of maintenance and cleanliness when selecting your materials. So obviously you do not want to have carpet in your station. So if you decide to go with a resilient tile or a hard tile, there are a lot of different patterns and grout colors that can really affect the look and the design of your station. Some facilities or some departments prefer a more commercial grade look with your stainless steel appliances, countertops, and casework, while other departments prefer more of a residential homey feel. So there are vast options for your kitchen material selections that can impact your costs. And an example with that is your countertops in particular. Plastic laminate and solid surface are kind of on your more economical end, while quartz and stainless steel are more durable options. So as mentioned before, the aesthetic of your building reflects the image you wish to portray for your station and your department as a whole. So a simple way to achieve this is with your color selection and integration between your exterior and your interior materials. So there is a fine line when selecting materials for fire stations, as you don't want it to look and feel institutional with the durability and the ease of maintenance, but you also don't want it to feel residential. So selecting the right products in the right colors will enable you to do this. So for fire stations, obviously, reds, oranges, and grays are classic. They are timeless. They're never going to go out of style. However, for those departments who wish to consider some less traditional options, neutral colors, blues, and greens are also classic choices. So other ways that departments make their station project their own is through additional design elements. So such as historic memorabilia or memorials. We have several stations that have integrated pieces of their previous buildings that show the pride that they have in their department's history while still getting their new facility. Additionally, wall coverings and murals are easily integrated and easily customizable that add just a small extra element to the design of your station. So leaving the material selection aside, I just want to touch briefly on ADA requirements for fire stations. Fire stations are public facilities, and therefore they must follow current ADA standards. To name a couple of requirements that affect them, you must maintain accessible means of egress at all times, which means that if you have a multi-story facility, you have to have an elevator. Now, this doesn't apply to mezzanine space. Mezzanine space is not a space that has to be accessed by everyone. You also must provide a portion of your plumbing facilities to be accessible toilet and showers. So this means you do not have to have automatic sensors for fixtures or doors, but, and these are not detrimental aspects to your facility, but they are things to keep in mind in the early stages of planning because they do impact your cost. So now I'm going to pass this over to Zach, and he's going to talk about building systems and their integrations.
Thanks, Ashley. All right, so we're going to fly through these sections, but they are pretty critical. And just like Stephen talked about the various aspects of the building programming and design, and Ashley talked about the interior finishes, we do have some primary priorities for building systems integration. And that is, of course, firefighter health and safety first, and then making sure we're thoughtful with operations and maintenance. And then as a result of those two designs, we also always want to consider energy efficiency and sustainability. So from a general building systems perspective, and this also impacts the architectural and structural systems, we always need to look at the local seismic conditions and apply the appropriate measures. So depending on where you are in the country, you may or may not need to consider various seismic design mitigation measures. And then depending on what your use of your facility is, whether it's simply a fire station or whether you also serve as perhaps a consolidated 911 or emergency operations center or a community shelter, additional systems may also need to be added into the seismic design to continue to maintain your essential services. And then I know there was a lot of interest when we looked at the poll at the start on carcinogens and risk reduction to firefighters. NFPA 1500 is how we do that within our firefighting facilities. So NFPA 1500 is a pretty wide-ranging standard. Particularly, we want to focus on chapters 10 and 14, and those refer back to facility safety and exposure to contaminants. So some key components of how we can be intentional about maintaining firefighter health and safety within our buildings is complying with NFP 101, which is the life safety code, and then also required by the newest version of NFPA 1500 are the following items. You need to have full automatic fire sprinkler coverage in the entire fire station. As Stephen mentioned, you also need to have direct capture source control for all of your apparatuses. And then we'll look in more detail at the zone separation, the red, yellow, and green, hot, cold, and neutral zones. And then you also have to have some considerations regarding your PPE. So not only do you have PPE when responding to your callouts, but then you also should be wearing PPE, usually an N95 and nitrile gloves when you're decontaminating that equipment so you don't continue to be exposed to those risk factors. And lastly, one thing that we see a lot that we always recommend against is no ice machines in the red or yellow zones, which means we can't put an ice machine in the apparatus bay or some of the adjacent storage areas. So we know you got to have ice machine to make all that ice for keeping cool water on callouts, especially in the summer, but we have to be a little bit more thoughtful about where that goes. So take a look back at this floor plan we saw earlier. And as you can see, the vast majority of the building is either yellow or green. So for the most part, in the apparatus bay, we really just want to maintain a neutral pressure within that space. Keeping those bay doors in the summer open is certainly great to cool things off. But one thing we do want to be very intentional about is in your washdown areas where you can actually shower after a call out, we want to use tempered water there. So standard hot water coming off of a shower will actually open up your skin pores too much, and that can introduce carcinogens into your bloodstream via your skin route. So we want to avoid that and be intentional about the shower design there. For our hot zones, that's where the equipment is actually being decontaminated. We're going to do a high airflow, exhaust only ventilation to continue to flush those contaminants from the space. And then in your green zone, all the administrative and living areas will positively pressurize that relative to the support areas and the red zones. So that way there is no way for contaminants to come from those dirtier areas into your green living area. We'll also be intentional about general indoor air quality and setting the space requirements for each type of space that's in those areas. We'll talk about that here shortly. But before we do that, I do want to touch briefly on COVID-19 and other pathogens. Thankfully, it seems like we are trending in a positive direction in the US, but it's still something we're very conscious of and think about in our mechanical designs and building designs. Of course, proper PPE is a high priority. And then with our ventilation and HVAC systems, there's a couple other sort of tiers of control that we can add in to mitigate the risk of COVID-19 and other pathogens within your fire station. That is primarily done through ventilation, just as much fresh outside air as possible. Then we want to filter that air to the highest quality that we can. And then lastly, we can look at some additional measures, whether that's particle monitoring or actual active disinfection, whether by UV or other emerging technologies to address those risks. And then when we put all these spaces together and look at these adjacencies and develop the program, we also want to make sure the systems that are installed to condition those spaces work well within your operations. And there are certain things that are unique to a fire station that we want to think about. Of course, the kitchen hood sizing and selection, as Stephen talked about, is important. Not only that though, but we also want to make sure if you have a call out, there's a quick kill button right on the wall as you run to the apparatus bay that will shut down not only your grill, your interior stoves, but also your grills if you've got grills outside. Also, like Stephen mentioned before, we want to have duress alarms within the workout areas. It's a health and safety concern, and it's a risk reduction approach. And then with the pressure controls for NFPA 1500, we'd like to actually put visible color-coded pressure indicators at all your transition spaces to make sure that anyone in the space can say, hey, we're good, or there's a safety issue and we need to address it with maintenance. Lastly, we want to do automated vehicle controls for that vehicle exhaust, the direct capture. And then of course, we want to make sure that we are very intentional about designing your ventilation systems so you can sleep in this facility. Sleeping temperatures and humidity are very different from occupied spaces. And so if the equipment isn't designed to account for that design condition, we might have issues during some parts of the year. So the more we can be thoughtful about designing for those spaces, the better. And then just generally, there are some operations and maintenance considerations that we always want to look at. Of course, we're prioritizing firefighter safety, system reliability, and ease of access. If you have multiple facilities, though, we also look at standardizing components, using the same vehicle exhaust in all of your facilities, and also being intentional about building automation. Okay. So there's a lot of things there that we can do to make it an easier building to live with. So we're not just going to do the most efficient system for the most efficient system's sake. We're going to use systems that the staff that are maintaining the equipment are comfortable maintaining, and that's going to be a better life cycle benefit for the firefighting group within the space. There are also some key considerations on the right-hand side. The ones I'll direct your attention to now are the water quality considerations. This is a home away from home, so we want to make sure that we're drinking and showering in high quality water. And so added filtration beyond sort of your typical commercial building is something we always look at. And then in addition to that, we want to make sure that we're coordinating all the rest of our systems within the apparatus space, like Stephen mentioned, and then also considering what goes on emergency power. Coming back to that seismic consideration, similarly, the size of your generator can have site and cost considerations, so we balance that as much as we can. And we are going to skip this poll and instead just tell you 28% of the operating costs for your building is going to be heating and utilities, and another 23% over the life cycle is repairs and maintenance. And so this is why it's really important that we're intentional about doing sustainable facilities that are energy efficient, because 50% of that life cycle cost over 40 to 50 years is paying the power bill. And so how do we do that? Well, we always use the most advanced energy modeling techniques that we can implement. We try and right size the equipment. And like Stephen was mentioning on the pre-planning phase, the best thing we can possibly do is get as much information from you as the end user on how you intend to use this building. The more in detail that we can refine our design on the front end, the smaller the equipment we can use and the longer that equipment can last. We'll also look at the life cycle cost of selecting higher efficiency equipment. Perhaps it's slightly more expensive to put an air handling unit inside the building than a packaged unit outside, but that indoor unit is going to last 25 to 30 years where the outdoor unit might only last 10. And so on a life cycle basis, a 10% increase in cost is sure better than replacing it 3 times over the life of the building. And then there are some broader energy and sustainability considerations we'll look at too. On the site side, we of course think about dark sky and clean water compliance with our lighting and stormwater management. We always look to use regional materials, especially now as supply lines have become constrained. To get things locally is almost always better and can provide a cost benefit as well. On the building envelope, we always look at low VOC products, especially for the interior occupied spaces, and recycled or recyclable materials. And then just managing the building membrane as much as we can. For systems, we look at light efficient controls and fixtures, and that integrated building automation I mentioned previously. And then there is a motion throughout the industry to move towards net zero energy buildings. We can do things on the front end in design that will prepare a fire station to be net zero ready if the department decides to move in that direction. Of course, there are some cost considerations to doing so, but again, looking on a life cycle basis of 40 or 50 years for a building, maximizing the energy efficiency up front, using passive design techniques, and having a building that is capable of renewable energy implementation, even if it's not done as the first phase of the project, are things that we always look at. And that brings us back to Stephen, and he's gonna just talk us through our key points.
So I said we had a lot of information to go through. I think we had a lot of information to go through. So hopefully it was educational for you. I want to touch base on a couple of key points, just as leap behind, and then if we have any questions, feel free to write them down. We'll answer as many as we can until we get logged out here. So key points, process. We talked about engagement of everyone. It's a linear development. Every phase has their stopgap in terms of reviews, but it's all built on the previous decisions that are made. You need to spend a lot of time up front. You need to establish a strong program document that really establishes those overall parameters to a project. You need to do your due diligence in selecting a site. Always explore and be open-minded when you have an open mind when you're doing a project. You need to not only consider your current, but also your future needs and the impact to that on a variety of different levels. Establish that total project budget, not just construction budget, but total project budget. System coordination is critical. Stations are more critical today in terms of the infrastructure that goes into them. You need to be aware of it. And of course, you need to select someone who's experienced in doing an experienced architect and engineer that has done fire stations before. And lastly, you got to embrace it. Embrace and enjoy and have fun. It's a great process. I've been doing it. We all enjoy what we do, and that's part of the reason why we do it every day. So now we go over to our trends and station components, things to keep in mind. Your firefighter health and safety, your zone configuration, as we talked about that, red, yellow, green zones, firefighter living quarters. It's more than just a place to sleep, okay? It's your home away from home. Apparatus bay is fairly complex today. You got to be aware of clearances and coordination of elements. Don't forget about the community. There's community space, multiple use, flexible spaces. Material selection can make or break a project and the successfulness of that. There's specially designed considerations. Remember, we talked about seismic, we talked about storm shelters, the safe place, safe haven locations. All of those need to come into play. Of course, some of this energy efficiency and response to COVID and so forth, we would consider especially design as well. That system building selection is important. HVAC systems, indoor air quality, that sleep deprivation, remember we talked about that, and also the overall energy efficiencies. So with that, why don't we just leave this up, just so and we'll be happy to share this with anyone. Just send us a note. And then did we have any questions, Zach?
Yeah, we had one question come in, which is, how do you keep acoustics down in the kitchen with all the hard surfaces in terms of countertops and everything else? Cabinets?
Sure,
yeah.
great point. So sometimes you don't know until it's actually constructed. But where the ceiling is located is one. Okay, so having a higher acoustic value for your ceiling. Also acoustic panels, you need to make sure the type of panel and the covering, because it's food prep. And so you need to be able, it needs to be washable, but you do have washable, durable coverings that you can place on that. You can also have, if you do use masonry, within there, some stations still want all masonry within there. You can have acoustic masonry. So basically it has little slits within the block itself, and you have insulation baffles that are placed within it. Sometimes you have to also put baffles up above. Remember, sound tends to reverberate and bounce around at 90-degree corners. And so it's important that you understand your space and you place them more in the corners than just in the room itself. So hopefully that answers the question, but there are treatments. There are some other ways to mask it, but if you can add some panels just to cut down that reverberation, that's to your benefit.
And we do have another question from Mr. Don Murdick. Considering the cultural and operational significance of the kitchen, have you been having discussions or success getting end user approval for installing an electric range versus gas in new construction?
You know, for the most part, in the Midwest, gas tends to be pretty cheap. And so I can't, to be honest, I think there's one station, Livermore. Down Livermore, I think they do have an electric. And I guess it's from our standpoint, what is the owner's preference? You know, if they want electric and they were able to acquire one or it's relocated, there's nothing wrong with electric. We just need to make sure that everyone is aware, you know, the heat time, it's just like at your home. Some people prefer gas over electric. So from a functional and operational standpoint, it might take a little bit longer to boil water on electric than gas, but no, we haven't had difficulty with that at all.
All right, and we have another question, which is what sort of price escalations are you incorporating through the duration of the American Recovery Act ending in 2024?
All right. So the general rule of thumb was about 3% of escalation each year. Okay, and the difficulty is right now that doesn't really hold true if you're trying to bid something right now. I will say we've had some recent projects I would say since the first of the year. So this first quarter that came in significantly under what was anticipated, and the escalation was much less because I think everyone was, to be honest, I hate to say it was the pandemic, but everyone was antsy to get back to work and get out. And so there was a lot of push and people were very aggressive in getting that. But we would always start out, there's some cost indexes that we usually refer to, construction debt market data information, but we usually start out at 3%. And then just take a look at that and be aware of it. I'll tell you right now, one of the things with material shortage, rebar and insulation, raw material, anything electronic. I was talking to someone last night with one of the major mechanical systems, and they can't get the chips for their equipment. So they're sort of out of luck right now. And so, you know, I think if you bid it right now, people are going to be anticipating that. So some of the material might be a little bit higher than the 3%.
Well, and even some of those materials that are normally cost-saving measures like wood are.
Well, yeah, exactly. There's a great example, just wood. So.
Alrighty, I think that is all the questions we've gotten so far.
Okay. All right. How are we on time right now?
We are at 1:23.
All right. So we're under the hour and a half. That's great. So I'll stay on the line if anyone wants to ask any questions later. If you have some that's going to take a little more depth, I would encourage you to go ahead and I think our emails were included. You can go ahead and ask the question. We'll be happy to get back with you. I guess on behalf of everyone here, we want to thank you for your time. I know your time is very busy these days and is valuable. But hopefully we gave a little more insight in terms of fire station design and what needs to be considered as you're doing a project. And so the other thing is, you know, as I said, embrace, enjoy it, have fun. Don't be scared. You know, there's a lot of questions that get asked. There are, as we always say, there's no dumb questions. We don't expect anyone to have all the answers. If it was as simple as going down to one of the big box stores and buying a fire station and as a kit of parts, you know, they would already have done it. It's much more complex than that. So we love doing fire stations, and we'd love sharing that information to all the fire departments in the cities that are out there. So appreciate your time. And we'll just one more.
And we did get one more question,
Okay.
which is contamination of turnout gear. Oh, two more questions. All right, we're getting rolling here. So contamination of turnout gear is very important. How do you handle the wash water? So I think that question is, what do you do with the water that has been used to wash your decon gear? Typically that's going to an oil water separator because it's within the decon apparatus based space. So all the sediments are going to get filtered out, but that is completely separate from the rest of the building. And so we do want to make sure that that is kept separate through the entire decontamination process.
Right, and it's treated separately with the
Yes.
oil water separator from your
Rest of the
normal
sanitary discharge.
sanitary system.
And I don't believe that there's no chemical treatment that's necessary.
Right, there's no,
So
post-treatment.
because you do have, I mean, it is contaminant that you're washing down, but it's not that that water needs to go into a septic holding that then needs to be treated and neutralized before the levels of that wash down is not significant that you need to do that too.
Yes.
At least so far, they haven't said you had to do that, so.
We've got a couple other questions that have come in. The next one is, would you consider doing another presentation? Absolutely, doesn't matter what it is. We love to talk, clearly.
Oh, wait, before you answer that one, so DLZ tends to have, keep an eye on our website. DLZ tends to, once a month, we have a new webinar on different topics. So we had one on ADA planning, I think, last month. We had this one. There's one that's on correctional work coming down. So we have these on a regular basis.
But in particular,
Anyway, go
what
right ahead.
topic are they asking
Yes,
for?
so this one is specifically focusing on station remodels for dense urban areas that don't have a lot of extra land, but a lot of really old stations are like that, 100%. We've
Yeah,
done plenty of those
I think that
projects.
would be a
That'd
great
really good
topic
one.
to.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we have another one, which is, what are your thoughts on BOT, build, occupy, and transfer funding?
So, yeah, the P3, it exists. We've been involved with those projects. I think you have to realize it's with that as well as with some of the design build procurement is that you lose a little bit of control as an owner. Okay, so from our standpoint, we design the project. So, but from an owner standpoint, the end product, you might have a little bit less control about what the end product is. And so, so it is a means that's out there. We've been involved with it. We've had success. We're currently doing a project now with it. We've been successful with it. I think you do lose, a little bit of control. So you may want, you have to choose your priorities and determine what can you live with and what is a non-negotiable item. And I think that's the biggest thing. With those, you have to realize the mechanical system, I'll be honest with you, mechanical systems tend to get cut and go with these sort of package units because they're cheap. I shouldn't say cheap, they're more economical up front. But in the long run, maybe it's not the most appropriate. So you just have to be careful with it. And that kind of goes back to that early phase of doing your due diligence and really understanding the full ramifications and not committing to one, because it's sort of like what we handle every day. We get someone coming in, selling their product, and it's the best thing and it solves all the problems in the world. And you really need to do your due diligence and drill into it and make sure it might be a great thing, but is it appropriate for you and your application? And that's how I would approach that.
In addition to that, I would note that if you do a design build or a build, occupy, transfer project, it's important for you as an owner to have a professional that works directly for you. So an architecture firm that's just helping you do the design criteria for it. Because, we have encountered projects where the process maybe wasn't, the parameters weren't identified properly enough, and the facility that they wanted the most was not the most economical one at the end of the day, and it's not the one that they were able to get, because with public money, there are complicated rules. So just making sure that, like Stephen said, doing your due diligence up front, setting as many of those parameters as you can get so that you make sure that you get the station that you want.
Alrighty. And then there's one final question, more of a housekeeping item of, are past presentations also available on your website? Yes, I believe they are. And feel free to email any of us if you'd like a link to specific presentations.
Yeah, we'll confirm that. I'm pretty sure they're all on our website. I don't think it's just an intranet. Oh, no, yeah, it's all, they're there. Okay.
Alrighty, and I think that answers everything.
Okay.
And we're right at 1:30.
All right. So thank you again. Appreciate it.
Oh, one more.
Oh, one more. I'll stay on forever until, Zoom logs me off here. So, or whatever we're using today. So.
Okay, so two more. All right. So when modeling new buildings for EUI, do you usually include the bay? Yes, 100%. we can do it one of two ways. We can either look at EUI for your green zone and then separately for the bay, or we can do it as all one model. Typically, it makes more sense to look at the whole thing because the reality is you're paying utility bills on the whole thing. And so we can look at EUI benchmarks compared to other fire stations. We're not just gonna say, oh, well, your EUI is crazy high, but that's compared to an office building. That doesn't make any sense.
So for those not familiar,
Yes,
other
EUI
people who are
Yes,
EUI.
thank you. EUI is energy usage intensity. So how much energy usually in BTUs per square foot your building is anticipated to consume on an annual basis. So of course, the energy consumption for a fire station is gonna be much different than a lot of facilities. Hopefully that answers that question. And then PFAS and toxins. Yes, those are a problem. So we do a couple things with PFAS and toxins. One, particularly in certain areas of the Midwest, due to heavy
And PFAS is?
polyfluorinated something or another. It's a really bad.
It's a bad
It's
chemical.
Teflon. It's Teflon. That's what it is.
Don't want that in your water.
You do not want it in your water. And due to certain industrial processes, it is present in some water supplies. It's becoming a more considered issue. We do put in filtration systems for the firefighters and for the stations to pull it out of the domestic water supply. And then other toxins as well, PFAS as well as other toxins can get contained within the PPE from structure fires. And so getting those flushed out of the PPE with the extractors is always something we want to make sure is done. And Rick, hopefully that answers your questions on those. And if it doesn't, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to talk about either of those more. And we've got one more.
We have a water resource group that we deal with water treatment throughout the country. So
Yes,
we might bring someone else a little more in depth depending on what your level of concern is.
absolutely. And Tiffany has posted a link, which I will share here as well. Oh, it's in the chat, so everyone should be able to see that, to our YouTube channel, and that's where all of our past presentations are located. That answers all the questions we have to this
All right.
point.
Except you keep saying that and we
I
keep
know, and then
getting
we'll
more
get more, which is
questions.
great, 'cause that's awesome. That's fantastic.
All right. Okay, so thank you. It's Wednesday. Have a great rest of the week, a great holiday, extended weekend. And also to all the firefighters, thank you. Appreciate your service, and it's not always recognized, but we appreciate your service in keeping us safe there. So
Especially in this
thank
past
you.
year.
Yep.
Yep. All righty. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.